Hello friends, my name is Leigh and I create videos about photography as an art and as a lifestyle. Today we're focusing on the art with a macro photo project. One of the things that I like to do with my photography is to take inspiration from artists or from art movements. I find that it gets me to try new things, it can fuel my creativity, and I always learn something. In this project, I explored the work of Georgia O'Keeffe, who was a painter in the early 20th century. I was looking specifically at her large-scale close-up flower paintings, and I used them as an inspiration in my macro photography. In this video, I will share the process with you from my research and setup to the gear I chose to use, the settings, how it all went awry, and how I adjusted the project, and of course my results. Plus, what I will bring forward into my daily photography from this project, things that I learned. Let's do it. Before we talk about Ms. O'Keeffe, I want to thank LUMIX for sponsoring this project. You will see in a minute that I did choose the LUMIX S5II for this project. I chose it because it's easy to use and it has a couple of features that I wanted to use, the high resolution mode and focus bracketing in camera. And I also really enjoy the colors that come out of the camera. I'm using it also now to film myself. Anyway, when I pull the raw images or video files into editing software, I'm pretty much always amazed that the photos and video look natural and beautiful already, which is perfect for this project. I will come back to the gear though in a minute. Let's talk a little bit about Georgia O'Keeffe, and I will show you some of her work. She grew up on a farm in Wisconsin around the turn of the 19th to 20th centuries, and throughout her life she lived in different places. Spent quite a bit of time in New York, but she was a true lover of the outdoors, and she eventually settled in New Mexico. This is important in understanding the art that we're focusing on today, but we will get back to that. Ms. O'Keeffe was quite successful and actually made her living as an artist, which is extraordinary, especially considering her gender and the time period in which she lived. Her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, was an art dealer and a photographer. And a funny thing that I read is that they would sometimes go out together into the great outdoors. She would paint, he would photograph, and then they would compare what they made later on. I guess they were a little bit competitive with each other, which just makes me laugh. They were heavily involved in the art scene at the time, especially in New York, and they spent time with many artists, including Ansel Adams. Actually, one of my favorite photos of Ms. O'Keeffe was captured by Mr. Adams at the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Okay, getting to the project. As artists do, Ms. O'Keeffe had different phases in her art. The phase that is probably the most well-known is when she was painting large-scale flowers. As I mentioned, she spent a lot of time outdoors and she loved nature. In these paintings, her goal was for people to really see the flowers and pay attention to them. She said that in real life, the flowers were small and people often passed them by without really looking at them. This is where the idea for my project came from. I love to explore, and even if I'm out running, I often stop to look at a rock or a flower or a bird in a tree, whatever catches my eye. So the idea of blowing that up through macro photography intrigued me. I have avoided macro photography in the past because, quite frankly, it can be a lot of work and take a lot of time. I simply don't currently love working in the studio. That's a little bit of foreshadowing there, but I choose a few plants from a nearby garden center and I brought them into my studio. Let's talk gear. I chose my LUMIX S5II and the LUMIX 24-105mm f4 lens, which is a macro lens. LUMIX does have a 100mm macro lens that's new. I wasn't able to get my hands on it for this project, which I initially thought was a bummer because I do love prime lenses, but I've used this 24-105 for multiple outings and the images are very sharp. And in fact, I found that I used 105mm for a lot of my shots for this project, but I ended up finding it really nice to be able to zoom out a bit sometimes, rather than like moving my entire tripod and potentially my entire setup. Now I chose the S5II for this project because the camera itself just gets out of my way so that I can focus on the end result. That's what I meant earlier when I said that the S5II is easy to use. I'm not fussing or searching for the settings and making adjustments like in the menus. When I'm exploring something new, like I was for this project, I want to be using a camera that I can rely on and that I know well so that I can focus on the art and enjoy myself. And then I also mentioned the colors earlier in this video. Let's talk about that for just a moment. As a rule, I want my raw image to look like what I saw with my eyes. Some cameras don't provide that unless you go in and you make a lot of adjustments in camera to the color science or in post-processing. I have no interest in that. The S5II gives me that natural look so that I can take raw image files whichever way I want to go with my editing. So that's why I chose the gear that I chose. What about the setting? In my studio here, I ended up using both my white backdrop and my black backdrop. I used my desk as a base along with some studio lights. I always have my big continuous studio lights with soft boxes on them around because I use them for filming my videos. So I used those as well as a smaller light that I could direct in a more precise way. For my settings on the S5II, I used manual mode and set my aperture, shutter speed, and ISO sensitivity to get the correct exposure from shot to shot. And then I used a couple of different options. I used focus bracketing, where I initially focus the camera in a particular spot, and then the camera will capture images in the surrounding focal planes. You have options for how many photos to capture and how much to move the autofocus with each photo. This will absolutely change from project to project or even from shot to shot, depending upon the subject and the goal of the final image. One important note here is that you do need to put those photos into editing software to stack them. There are different options for software, but they all stack and blend the images so that you end up with a photo with all of those areas in focus. The reason that you go through all of that work is to achieve a more deep depth of field than you would normally be able to achieve. In this case, I'm working at macro distances, which leads to a very shallow depth of field, even at narrow apertures. So this counteracts that. There's nothing wrong with the shallow depth of field image, but like in Ms. O'Keeffe's flower paintings, I wanted the viewer to be able to really see and be able to examine the full flower or plant. That being said, instead of focus bracketing on some of the images, I used high resolution mode, where the S5II shifts its 24 megapixel sensor to achieve an approximation of a 96 megapixel sensor image. Using that, I have a more shallow depth of field, but I can zoom and zoom on my screen or crop the image more to make a certain part of the plant the focal point. It's a neat way to bring the viewer's attention to the details, parts of the plant that you would otherwise not notice. On this channel, I've talked a lot about telling a story of a place or an event. Here, I can show you a wider photo of the flower, but then also a much zoomed in photo as well. So you have some context of what you're looking at. This is a good place to pause and talk about what I was experiencing while capturing these photos. I was not enjoying myself. It was surprising. I was frustrated. I came back to my studio for 3 days thinking that was going to be the day where it all came together for me. Thank goodness for the S5II being so easy to use, because I don't think I would have continued from there if the camera hadn't been as easy to use and as capable with the focus bracketing and the high resolution mode and the colors that I mentioned before. So I tried editing the images in different ways, which did help me along. I didn't expect that I would want to make any of these monochrome, but then I found that the texture was showcased in monochrome, which I liked. But I knew that something was still missing, so I stopped to regroup. I realized that I was missing the little bit of abstraction that the paintings of Ms. O'Keeffe have, the romance they have. And something I read about her is that she, at least sometimes, wanted to paint how the scene made her feel rather than simply how it looked in real life. Her flowers often appeared to be flowers, but there was certainly an abstraction to them. That absolutely resonates with me, so I realized that I needed to modify my project from being so scientific to being art that evokes some sort of feeling in me. So out to the desert I went, where I was sure to find some emotion for myself. Finally, I finally figured it out. The studio sessions didn't feel like my art, if you know what I mean. It felt like a scientific experiment. I've seen so many beautiful macro shots from the studio from other photographers, but it just wasn't for me. It was definitely a good learning tool to get used to those features of the camera, especially, but it was when I went outside in nature at sunrise on a spring morning when I did have the challenges like a little bit of wind, bugs, only having things that I could carry with me, did I feel the enjoyment and like I was able to create art. I love the way some of the desert plants appear to glow when the sun is near the horizon. I love the natural light and shadow. I love the abstract background rather than a sterile studio backdrop. I still needed patience and I still needed to sometimes make minute adjustments, but I didn't lock myself into any one technique. I shot handheld, on the tripod. I used high resolution mode sometimes, focus bracketing other times, sometimes neither. I shot in portrait orientation sometimes, landscape others. These aren't even necessarily all macro images. I decided from shot to shot as I was hiking what technique and composition was best for the subject I was capturing. This allowed me to capture the dreaminess that I wanted, the romance in the lighting, the curves, the color and texture. Needless to say, I loved it, and I am so happy with my final images. So I got there, but it took some time to make this project my own and to feel fulfilled by it. I learned that macro photography is exacting, and you got to make tiny changes in between photos. You absolutely need patience. Choosing the right gear is important. And I was reminded yet again that you do need to roll with the punches when you are trying something new or when things aren't going your way. If a project or an outing isn't what you expect, you have to try something new. And if that isn't a guideline for life in general, I don't know what is. And I will absolutely carry forward my new knowledge about focus bracketing and stacking into future projects. I want to try it out with landscapes, actually. I've never done that before. Georgia O'Keeffe is one of my favorite artists. I very much want to visit the areas of New Mexico where she spent so much time. Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and definitely Ghost Ranch. Ghost Ranch offers workshops, and I will at some point visit and explore that area. That's where she lived for a while, by the way. It's a landscape photo project for another day, though. For now, I'm going to wrap this project up and open up the comment section to you all. What do you think about this project? Is it something that you might try, or are you a macro flower photography expert already? If you are into macro photography, let us know your favorite tools and software for the job. I look forward to talking to you all down in the comments about this. I will also link a few things in the description of this video. Some of my favorite books about Georgia O'Keeffe, certainly, and the gear that I used for this project, including my LUMIX S5II and this macro lens here. And also a video where I compared this lens with the 24 to 70 millimeter f2.8 lens that I'm filming with right now, and we discussed choosing one or the other. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss my next video, and hit the like button while you're at it. Those are both a big help for the channel. Thank you to LUMIX again for sponsoring this project, and thank you for watching.